If there was anything Drax knew about fixing things, it was that nothing ever stayed fixed. The damn space elevator was no exception. It hung there, a testament. There you go, Drax, using big words again, to humankind's ridiculous optimism. Optimism that one day this hunk of metal and wires would float them all out of this decaying Dyson sphere to a place that didn't smell like burnt circuits and desperation. When your job revolves around preventing everyone from plummeting to their doom, you'd think management would pay a bit better, Drax grumbled, his hands greasy from patching up the latest in a long line of minor malfunctions. Maybe they spent all the budget on motivational posters, Yara replied, leaning against the wall of the small maintenance pod they shared. Hang in there seems fitting, don't you think? Drax snorted, giving a resigned nod. Yara had a knack for diplomacy, wielding pacifism like a seasoned commander wielded a plasma rifle. She was as sharp as a knife, but used words like a well-aimed slap, enough to sting without leaving a mark. I'd settle for a drink, Drax sighed, checking his toolkit. Something to wash down the taste of recycled air and corporate lies. Who needs a drink when you have the sweet scent of nihilism? Yara said with a smirk, watching as Drax fiddled with the controls. The comms panel crackled to life, spitting static like an old cat coughing up a furball. Drax smacked it as if brute force ever made anything work better. This is command. All personnel on alert, unidentified vessels inbound. Repeat, unidentified vessels inbound. Unidentified vessels, Drax echoed, rolling his eyes. Code for we don't have a clue what the hell's going on. Yara straightened up, her usual laid-back air replaced by something approaching alertness. That sounds like trouble. I was hoping for a lazy afternoon, Drax said, peering through the pod's window. Outside, the elevator shaft stretched up into the inky abyss, lined with flickering lights that gave the whole contraption a haunted, broken feel. Looks like your lazy afternoon's been rescheduled, Yara said, her voice tight with a mix of sarcasm and genuine concern. A sudden jolt rattled the pod, making them both grab onto whatever was closest. For Drax, it was his toolkit which promptly spilled its contents onto the floor, tools and loose screws scattered like marbles on ice. Damn it, he cursed, scrambling to gather the precious contraptions of his trade. These things cost more than my rent. Another shudder, more violent this time, sent a groan through the elevator's structure, the kind of sound that made you question every life choice leading up to this moment. Ah, the sweet sound of impending doom, Yara quipped, trying her best to keep her balance. You know, I always imagined I'd die in a more dignified manner, Drax muttered, clinging to the wall. Really? I pictured you choking on a sandwich, Yara replied, deadpan. Comforting, Drax said dryly. If we're going to die, could we at least do it quietly? The next impact wasn't so polite. The elevator's entire framework screamed, a long, tortured wail as metal fought a losing battle against inertia and gravity. Brace! Drax shouted, as the world tilted and the pod was flung sideways, spinning like a carnival ride designed by a sadist. I've always hated this song, Yara yelled over the cacophony, her knuckles white against the safety rail. Somewhere outside, beyond the confines of their rattling prison, the sky exploded with light and sound. Alien ships cut through the darkness, their silhouettes sharp and menacing, the kind of ships that didn't come in peace but came armed to the teeth. Must have read the brochure, Drax thought, gripping the rail with a desperation that bordered on reverent. The elevator's screams turned into a death rattle, a symphony of failing systems and snapping cables. In the jarring chaos, Drax caught a glimpse of Yara, her eyes narrowed with focus. She was already plotting, thinking on her feet like she always did. Any brilliant ideas? Drax shouted, his voice barely rising above the din. Survive first, quip later, she shot back, her fingers flying over the terminal, attempting to stabilize their descent. Good plan, Drax said, kicking a loose panel back into place as if that alone could stop the inevitable. The pod dropped, a stomach-lurching plummet that made Drax's guts twist like a bad joke. The light of the Dyson sphere faded into darkness, the kind that swallowed screams and didn't bother to echo them back. In that split second, time stretched, a fragile string pulled taut over an abyss. Guess they don't like human empathy, Yara managed, her voice a mix of fear and defiance. Their loss, Drax grunted, bracing for impact. And then the world went white, a blinding flash that erased everything. The floor rushed up to meet them, and Drax wondered in a detached sort of way if he'd ever get to fix another damn thing again. The impact was not gentle. It was a violent embrace, the kind that left bruises and broken bones. When Drax came to, he was upside down, his head pounding like a drum solo gone wrong. The taste of copper filled his mouth, a reminder that, yes, he was still alive. "Hey," he croaked, spitting blood and dust. "You dead?" "Not yet," came Yara's voice, distant and muffled. "But give it a minute." Drax blinked, trying to clear his vision. The pod was a wreck, a tangled mess of metal and wires that looked like it had been through a blender. "Looks like we got off on the wrong floor," Yara said, coughing as she crawled free from the wreckage, her movements purposeful despite the chaos. "Just our luck," Drax said, pulling himself upright. He quickly checked for broken bones, nothing major, just a series of bruises that would make a Technicolor masterpiece. Outside, the alien ships loomed closer, their motives as inscrutable as their designs. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Yara asked, looking at him with that glint in her eye that said trouble was ahead. "That we've got front row seats to the end of the world," Drax replied, managing a hollow laugh. "Yeah, something like that." The Dyson sphere, once a marvel of engineering, now seemed like a tomb, a hollow shell echoing with the impending threat that had come to call. "If this is the end, we might as well go out with a bang," Yara said, her voice firm. Drax nodded, feeling a strange kind of peace settle over him. Or at least a sarcastic quip or two. Together, they stood amidst the wreckage, the weight of survival pressing down with every alien movement in the sky. It was a precarious balance, teetering on the edge of annihilation, but for the moment it was theirs. "Let's hope they're not here to discuss our lack of hospitality," Yara said, cracking a grin that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Something tells me we're about to find out," Drax replied, eyes fixed on the sky as the first of many answers began their descent. And so they waited, two tiny figures in the shadow of a dying giant, ready to face whatever came next with grim determination and a well-timed joke. The remains of the space elevator rained down like stubborn confetti, refusing to let anyone celebrate anything. Drax stood amidst the chaos, a monument to the universe's cosmic sense of humor, or maybe just a guy with a bleeding scalp trying to make sense of the new status quo. "Well, that was a fun ride," he said, brushing metal shavings out of his hair. The Dyson sphere, once a marvel, now just a big, spherical joke at his expense. Yara stood nearby, surveying the wreckage like a cat considering the remains of a broken vase. "I always thought I might die in a blaze of glory, not under falling debris. At least I can cross crushed my own workplace off the list." "Silver linings," Drax muttered, squinting at the horizon. Alien ships were already dotting the sky like a rash nobody wanted to talk about. "Well, look at that. Uninvited guests. Guess they didn't RSVP," Yara replied with a shrug. "Typical." As they picked their way through the debris, they stumbled upon survivors sprawled like rag dolls. Some were moving, some weren't. It reminded Drax of a disturbing game of cosmic musical chairs, minus the music, more like the sounds of despair and spacefaring doom. From the midst of the chaos, a voice emerged. "You've really done it this time, haven't you, Drax?" Cade, the self-proclaimed tactician and professional skeptic, appeared with his signature scowl. If cynicism had a face, Cade wore it well. "Nice to see you too, Cade," Drax replied, not missing a beat. "I was just thinking how much this disaster needed your sparkling personality." "Save it," Cade retorted, eyes scanning the wreckage. "We've got bigger problems than your self-deprecating humor, like not getting vaporized by our new friends up there." "Can't say I'm a fan of their welcome party," Yara added, gesturing to the sky with a nonchalance that belied the chaos. Drax nodded, trying to ignore the ominous silhouettes overhead. "We need to get people moving." Find some cover before those ships decide to rearrange the landscape. Cade snorted. Cover? In this glorified tin can, you've got better odds of finding a politician with a moral compass. True, but any chance is better than none, Yara said, her voice cutting through the dreariness like a knife. The three of them began herding what remained of humanity around them. Drax led the charge, his own sense of irony acting as a compass. Because why not trust the guy who couldn't keep an elevator from falling apart? They moved with the urgency of a last-minute tax return, scrambling over twisted metal and dodging sparking wires. Each step was a reminder that life was fragile, and the universe seemed keen on proving it. As they pressed deeper into the Dyson sphere's labyrinthine interior, Drax could feel the structure's decay pressing in. It was a place that had long since given up on being anything other than a graveyard with a view. Think we can get these people to safety? Cade asked, his tone suggesting he was more likely to believe in flying pigs. Define safety, Drax replied, not slowing his pace. Because I'm not sure such a place exists right now. Yara, ever the optimist, threw in her 2 cents. We just need to keep them alive long enough to regroup. There's strength in numbers, even if those numbers consist mostly of terrified, underpaid maintenance workers. Cade had the decency to look thoughtful, which for him was akin to a smile. All right, let's play this your way. But when the aliens come knocking, don't say I didn't warn you. If they come knocking, I'll make sure to let you answer the door, Yara shot back with a wink. The corridors of the Dyson sphere seemed endless, twisting paths that led either to salvation or a dead end, with a great view of oblivion. Drax could hear their ragtag group behind him, a symphony of shuffling feet, muted panic and whispered prayers to deities that had long since stopped listening. This place is a real mood lifter, Drax said, more to himself than anyone else. If I ever get out of here, I'm writing a scathing review. Yara chuckled softly. I'm sure management will be thrilled to hear it. Assuming they're not already vaporized. One can dream, Cade said, eyeing the dark corners with suspicion. Though if they are, I guess that's one way to deal with the lack of pay raises. They finally reached what passed for an open area, a chamber large enough to house their band of survivors. Drax counted heads, trying to make sure they hadn't left anyone behind. It was a bit like herding cats with a countdown timer. All right, folks, Yara began, her voice steady and reassuring. We need to stay calm and stick together. We're going to figure this out. Figure this out, a voice echoed from the crowd, disbelief dripping from the words. We're screwed. Thanks for the pep talk, Drax deadpanned. Very inspiring. Cade stepped forward, arms crossed. Look, we've survived this long. Let's not waste it by panicking now. We need to think, and more importantly, we need to act. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, though it was laced with anxiety. The survivors huddled together like lost sheep in a world of wolves. Drax turned his attention to the problem at hand. We need a plan. Something that doesn't end with us as alien mulch. Or alien test subjects, Yara added, eyes scanning the nervous faces. I'm not keen on discovering what kind of probing they might be into, Cade smirked. Keep it classy, Yara. Always, she replied without missing a beat. As they debated their next move, the air grew thick with the tension of survival, the kind that makes you hyper-aware of every breath, every heartbeat, every unspoken fear. All right, Drax finally said, clapping his hands for attention. Here's the deal. We need to find a secure area to regroup. The sphere's got some hidey holes if we can reach them before our new friends up there get too curious. Hidey holes, Cade muttered. Is that the technical term? Drax shrugged. As technical as it gets right now, unless you'd prefer temporary sanctuary. I'll stick with hidey holes, Cade conceded. Less syllables. With a vague plan in place, they moved again, picking their way through the decaying structure. As they went, Drax felt a strange kinship with the group, a shared understanding that in a universe hell-bent on their destruction, they were all they'd got. So, Drax, Yara said, falling into step beside him. Any chance we can hitch a ride on one of those fancy ships up there? Drax snorted. Yeah, let me just call them up. Hi, alien overlords. Mind giving us a lift? We promise not to bleed on the seats. Hey, worth a shot, she replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Desperate times, desperate measures, and all that. Cade, overhearing, chimed in. Just don't get any ideas about trading me for passage. I doubt they'd find me as charming as you all do. Charming, Drax echoed. That's one way to put it. Their banter was a thin veneer over the underlying fear, a way to keep the darkness at bay even as it crept closer. But for now, it was enough. Okay, people, Yara called out as they approached a section of the sphere that seemed less likely to collapse at any moment. Let's set up a base here. Keep your eyes peeled and your ears open. As they settled in, Drax took a moment to catch his breath, leaning against a wall that felt about as stable as his career prospects. The air was thick with sweat, exhaustion, and the kind of tension that could snap at any second. You think we'll make it out of this? Cade asked, his voice low and devoid of its usual sarcasm. Drax considered the question, staring into the shadows. I think if sheer stubbornness counts for anything, yeah, we just might. Yara joined them, her usual bravado tempered by the reality of their situation. If nothing else, we'll go down fighting, or quipping, Cade added, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. Because that's what we do best. Drax chuckled, though it sounded more like a cough. Quip first, ask questions later. Story of my life. Outside, the alien ships maintained their vigil, a constant reminder that safety was an illusion they couldn't afford. Yet here, amidst the ruin and uncertainty, there was a spark of hope. Hope that humanity, flawed and irreverent as it was, might just have a fighting chance. All right, Drax said, pushing off the wall and facing his motley crew. Let's get to work. We've got a sphere to outsmart and some serious odds to defy. And with that, they plunged back into the fray, a band of survivors united by desperation and gallows humor, ready to face whatever the universe threw their way. Drax rubbed the back of his head, scowling at the warm stickiness there. You know, I always thought I'd die with more dignity. Like choking on a cheeseburger. Yara snorted as she surveyed the dim chamber they'd chosen as their temporary hideout. Drax, you'd find a way to make even that look tragic. Cade was pacing, his scowl etched so deep it could probably cut glass. He stopped, pointing a finger at Drax with the kind of accusatory zeal usually reserved for tax collectors. This is exactly why I said no to that elevator maintenance gig. Be part of history, they said. Didn't mention it was the history of falling apart. You're just mad you have to share your apocalypse with us, Yara said, leaning against the wall with an air of nonchalance that belied the chaos outside. More like you, Cade shot back, his expression suggesting he was imagining her as a particularly annoying fly. I was hoping for a quieter end of days, and then they heard it, a soft, almost pitiful sound, like a cat mewling after a night out. In a place where the most common sound was the creak of decay, it was enough to set every nerve alight. Did you hear that? Drax asked, more to confirm he wasn't hallucinating than for an actual answer. Unless it's the sound of my sanity leaving, Cade muttered, already grabbing a piece of twisted metal as a makeshift weapon. Yara raised an eyebrow. Is it too much to hope it's a friendly alien, here to usher us off this sinking ship? Drax shook his head, edging toward the noise. Friendly and alien are two words that rarely go together, Yara. But let's find out before we make assumptions. The three of them moved cautiously, shadows stretching like the limbs of a very clingy ex. They turned a corner and there it was, a small, huddled figure, its body a riot of mismatched colors and protrusions, like someone had tried to assemble an alien from spare parts and gotten bored halfway through. Oh, look, Yara whispered. It's a. What is it? It's hurt, Drax said, kneeling beside it. The alien looked up, its eyes like pools of dark ink, reflecting the dim light with a sheen that was almost accusing. Great, Cade huffed, folding his arms. We've found the galactic equivalent of a stray puppy. The alien made a sound, a garbled mix of clicks and whistles that might have been speech or just a very confused scream. I don't know what it said, but it doesn't look like it's here for a fight, Yara said, crouching down beside Drax. Yeah, Well, neither was the last cat I tried to pet, Cade muttered, shifting from one foot to the other, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. Thing nearly took my thumb off. But it didn't, did it? Yara quipped, her usual smirk returning. Look at you, all 10 digits intact. This little guy's not going to bite your hand off. Drax was already checking the alien for injuries, his hands moving with the kind of care usually reserved for defusing bombs. It's got a nasty gash here. Looks like it had a rougher landing than the rest of us. Isn't that just karma, Cade said. Alien wrecks our day, we find one that's wrecked itself. That's a bit harsh, Yara said, shooting him a glare. Karma's got better things to do than babysit us. Drax pulled a medkit from his pack with the air of someone who knew it was probably a waste of time but was willing to try anyway. If it's a spy, it's doing a pretty bad job. We should help it. Help it, Cade exploded, throwing his hands up. Help the thing that's probably got friends up there turning us into target practice. You're joking, right? Yara crossed her arms, eyes narrowed. What are you so scared of, Cade? It's not like it's going to call its buddies and invite them over for a barbecue. Who says they don't eat barbecue? Cade snapped back, though there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Drax focused on the alien, trying to remember the basic first aid he'd learned in what felt like a past life. We're not leaving it to die. If there's one thing humans can do better than anyone else, it's sticking their noses where they don't belong. Yara smirked. And look at us now, meddling in alien affairs. We're making history, or rewriting it, Cade grumbled, rubbing his temples. Fine. But when its friends start shooting at us like a carnival game, I reserve the right to say I told you so. Noted, Drax said, cautiously applying a makeshift bandage to the alien's wound. The creature winced but didn't lash out, which Drax took as a good sign. The alien made a series of low, mournful sounds as if it was trying to communicate. Yara leaned in closer. Is it just me, or does it sound like it's saying thank you, or planning our demise in its cute little alien notebook? Cade grumbled, but he didn't move to stop them. Drax gave the alien a reassuring pat, hoping it understood the gesture. There, patched up. Now what are we going to do with it? Yara, ever the optimist or perhaps just the reckless one, grinned. We keep it. It's our ticket to understanding what's going on. Keep it. Cade's voice rose an octave. It's not a pet, Yara. Fine, fine, Yara said, holding up her hands. I'll call it a temporary ally. Drax stood, feeling the weight of their situation settle back onto his shoulders like an old, uncomfortable coat. Temporary ally or not, we need to keep moving. Those ships haven't forgotten about us. The small alien seemed to understand, or maybe it was just too weak to resist, as it allowed Yara to help it stand. Drax looked at it, then at his friends, feeling a strange sense of camaraderie with this bizarre crew. Welcome to the team, he said to the alien, who blinked back at him with eyes that seemed far too knowing. Just what we needed, Cade sighed, though there was a hint of reluctant acceptance in his voice. More mouths to feed. As if we were planning on a 5-star meal, Yara teased, giving the alien's shoulder a gentle pat. Right, Drax said, motioning for everyone to follow. Let's find a way out of this mess before the universe decides we've had too much fun. They moved as one, an unlikely band of misfits. Drax took the lead, his mind abuzz with plans and contingencies, trying to ignore the fact that they were essentially walking into the unknown with an alien companion that might be as much a threat as it was an ally. Think this little fella's got any ideas on how to get out of here? Yara asked, glancing at their new friend. Probably more than we do, Drax said. And if it doesn't, well, we'll just have to wing it. Not like we haven't done that before. Cade rolled his eyes. Yeah, and look where winging it got us. Alive, Yara said simply. That's better than most. The alien, who they were starting to affectionately call Zilex, for reasons none of them could quite articulate, remained silent through all of this, its eyes flicking between its human companions with a mix of curiosity and resignation. Drax couldn't help but feel a swell of strange pride. Sure, the situation was one step shy of apocalyptic, but they'd made it this far, and if he had anything to say about it, they'd make it a lot further. Let's keep moving, Drax urged, leading them down another darkened corridor. We've got a sphere to outsmart and some serious odds to defy. Cade snorted, but there was no malice in it. Just another day at the office, then. Exactly, Drax said, with the kind of determination that only comes from having nothing left to lose. Let's show the universe what we're made of. As they pressed on, the alien ships loomed above, a constant, silent threat. But for the first time, Drax felt a flicker of hope, because in a universe that seemed hell-bent on their destruction, they'd found a way to laugh in its face. The corridor stretched ahead like the gut of some indolent beast, walls pocked with rust and neglect, remnants of a once great civilization that had decided, at some point, to pack its bags and sod off to greener pastures, or maybe just got tired of pretending it cared. Drax led the group, each footfall a defiant thump against the absurdity of their survival. With every step, their collective optimism seemed to evaporate like piss on a hot sidewalk. "Here's a thought," Cade groused, lagging behind like a surly shadow. "Maybe we should have stayed behind and waited for the universe to finish us off. Would have saved us the hassle of pretending we have a plan." Yara's laugh was a dry cough of amusement. "Where's the fun in that? Besides, we're not the type to go down without clawing a bit first." "Clawing at what exactly?" Cade shot back. "Empty promises and whatever the hell that is." He pointed at Zilex, who was shuffling along with the enthusiasm of a sloth on sedatives. Drax turned, fixing his gaze on Cade, the way a butcher might survey a particularly troublesome cut of meat. "It's called survival, Cade. The one thing we're inexplicably good at. You know, despite the universe's best efforts to make us dead." As if on cue, a distant explosion rattled through the chamber, sending a cascade of dust from the ceiling. Drax paused, considering the echo with the same enthusiasm as one might muster for a root canal. "See, things could be worse." "That could have been us." Zilex, meanwhile, was silently surveying the interplay with its large, ink-black eyes. There was something almost comical in the way it looked on, like a teacher watching children argue over whose turn it was at the swing set. Yara, ever the diplomat or maybe just bored by the constant bickering, decided to change the subject. "So, Zilex, got any secrets you'd like to share? Maybe a map to the exit, or a way to get those friendly ships off our collective backs." Zilex paused, its eyes flickering between the trio. It raised a hand-like appendage, a gesture that seemed to carry a weight of its own. Then, in a series of clicks and whistles that suggested it was attempting to communicate, it made a sound that could only be described as a muffled accordion being strangled by a disgruntled octopus. "Oh, great," Cade muttered. "It's got a sense of drama." Yara leaned in. "I think it's trying to say something, you know, besides get me away from these lunatics." Drax nodded, taking a step closer. "Let's give it a shot, then." He gestured for Zilex to continue. The alien's eyes shifted, its gaze strangely human as it tried again. More clicks, more whistles, then a mixture of sounds that gradually began to take shape in a language their minds could wrap around. Aliens, fear, human, empathy. "Did it just say empathy?" Cade asked, eyebrows climbing his forehead. "As in, the thing we're accused of not having." "Guess they haven't read the report on human history," Yara chuckled, glancing at Drax. "Empathy's not exactly our most advertised trait." Zilex continued its guttural serenade, now more coherent. "Aggression, prevent you, win allies." Yara's eyes widened in realization. "They're scared of us making friends with other species. Isn't that just the cosmic punchline?" Drax processed this, his mind racing. "So they're trying to keep us isolated, make sure we're too busy scrambling for survival to form alliances." "Smart strategy," Cade mused, albeit grudgingly. "Keep your enemies playing catch-up while you have the high ground." Zilex nodded, or at least bobbed its head in a way that conveyed agreement. "Yes, fear. Your kindness." The words were clumsy, like it was trying on a new pair of boots, but the message was clear enough. "Well, that's just perfect," Yara said, leaning back against the wall. "They're scared of our ability to care. Yet here we are, practically dressed as space pirates just to scrape by." Drax chuckled darkly. "Funny how the universe works, huh?" The one thing they fear, and we're using it to patch up an enemy. Cade folded his arms, a thinker's pose if ever there was one. So, what do we do about it? Send out a greeting card signed with "Love, Humanity," Yara shrugged. Might be worth a shot. Or we could, I don't know, survive long enough to piss them off by existing. That's more our style, Drax agreed, the familiar weight of determination settling over him like a well-worn coat. But we're going to need more than just good intentions and sarcasm to pull it off. The alien ships above them remained an omnipresent threat, their constellations of light blinking in the dark void of space, a reminder that their time was limited and the stakes were as high as ever. As they moved through the labyrinthine corridors, each turn a roll of the dice, the group's morale began to fray. Hunger and exhaustion were constant companions, whispering in their ears like the world's worst motivational speakers. "Got anything to eat in that pack of yours?" Yara asked, half joking, half serious. Cade shook his head, his expression a mix of frustration and resignation. "Unless you fancy chewing on the remnants of hope, I'm fresh out." "Hope's not very filling," Yara sighed, her sarcasm laced with fatigue. Drax wasn't faring much better. His mind, usually a fortress of strategic thinking, was starting to resemble a crumbling sandcastle. "We need to find supplies, and soon. Otherwise, starvation will do what the aliens couldn't." Zilex, perhaps sensing the growing desperation, gestured towards a side corridor, its eyes imploring. "Help." "This way." Though hesitant, Drax trusted the alien's instincts, a decision that was either a stroke of genius or a prelude to disaster. "Let's follow it. Not like we've got better options." "Lead the way, Zilex," Yara said, falling in line with a weary smile. "If we end up dead, I'll haunt you forever." The alien led them through the winding passages, each turn an exercise in trust and recklessness. Drax felt the weight of their reliance on Zilex, a strange comfort in the uncertainty. After what felt like an eternity, Zilex stopped in front of a sealed door, its markings faded and inscrutable. It gestured towards a control panel, then looked expectantly at the humans. "Guess this is where we come in," Drax said, stepping forward. The panel was as old and stubborn as an ancient bureaucrat, but he managed to coax it into compliance. The door slid open with a reluctant groan, revealing a storeroom filled with supplies, a cache of salvation in a world that seemed intent on their demise. Cade let out a low whistle. "Well, look at that. It's like the universe decided to throw us a bone." Yara wasted no time, diving into the supplies with the enthusiasm of a kid at a candy store. "I'm starting to think Zilex might be our good luck charm." While the three humans rifled through the treasure trove, Zilex stood back, watching with a mix of curiosity and satisfaction. It seemed to understand that in helping them, it was securing its own survival. Drax filled his bag with whatever would fit, a motley collection of rations and tools, each piece a tiny victory. "All right, we've got what we need. Now let's get out of here before someone decides they want their stuff back." As they prepared to leave, Zilex made a series of gestures, its face a mask of urgency. "Hurry, ships, searching." Drax nodded, the urgency infectious. "Let's move." "I'd rather not stick around for round two." They left the storeroom behind, a new sense of purpose propelling them forward. Each step was a rebellion against the odds, a refusal to be buried by apathy and despair. Cade, ever the skeptic, couldn't resist a parting jab. "So, what's the plan? Keep running till we run out of space." "Something like that," Drax replied, his tone light but determined. "We'll keep moving, keep fighting, keep doing what humans do best." "And what's that?" Yara asked, a touch of amusement in her voice. Drax smiled, the kind of smile that could cut through the darkest night. "Survive." With Zilex in tow, they ventured deeper into the labyrinth, a ragtag band of misfits against the universe. It was madness, it was folly, but it was all they had. In the end, maybe that was enough. The cramped confines of the alien ship felt like being trapped inside a metal coffin with a malfunctioning disco ball. Drax, Yara, and Cade were herded through the dimly lit corridors by their captors, whose idea of hospitality seemed to involve a lot of pointing with weapons, and snarling in an alien dialect that sounded suspiciously like someone gargling gravel. "Well, this is cozy," Yara muttered, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I always wanted to see the inside of an alien prison, just not this week." Drax shot her a sidelong glance. "I'm sure they'll be sending out complimentary gift baskets any minute now." Cade, trudging along with the enthusiasm of a man heading to his own execution, couldn't resist a dig. "If we live through this, remind me to not thank whoever sold us out." Yara's expression darkened, but her voice remained light. "I'll bet it was Zilex, probably tired of our sparkling conversation." "That explains why we haven't seen Zilex since the storeroom," Drax added, his tone a mix of frustration and resignation. Guess we weren't the only ones playing the survival game. The corridor opened into a cavernous chamber filled with cells, each one a testament to the diversity of interstellar imprisonment. Drax and his team were unceremoniously shoved into separate cells, the doors slamming shut with a finality that echoed through the chamber. "Great," Cade muttered, throwing himself onto the uncomfortable bench that passed for a bed. "Room service is probably non-existent." Drax leaned against the wall, his mind racing through potential escape plans. "This is just a setback. We've been in worse spots." "Name one," Yara shot back, her voice echoing from her adjoining cell. Drax hesitated, then sighed. "Fine, maybe not worse, but equally shitty," Cade snorted. "At least we're consistent." The Iors dragged on, the passage of time marked only by the occasional thrum of the ship's engines and the distant, unsettling chittering of their captors. Drax tried to maintain a sense of calm, but the weight of their situation was pressing down on him like a particularly enthusiastic sumo wrestler. Across the narrow walkway, Yara shifted on her bench, trying to find a comfortable position that didn't exist. You'd think with all their advanced tech, they'd invent something better than a rock-hard mattress. "Alien ergonomics," Cade replied. "Not their top priority, I guess." A silence settled over them, the kind that stretched and twisted, growing more uncomfortable by the second. Drax broke it with a question that had been gnawing at him. "You think Zilex was playing us the whole time?" Yara shrugged, though he couldn't see it. "Probably, or maybe it saw an opportunity. Can't blame it for wanting to survive." "Doesn't stop me from wanting to wring its neck," Cade grumbled, though there was a flicker of uncertainty in his voice. "If it even has a neck." Drax knew Cade enough to recognize the conflict in his tone. The man was a cynic through and through, but there was still a part of him that craved some kind of justice, however small. The door to the chamber slid open with a hiss, and an alien guard entered, its eyes sweeping over the occupants like a warden surveying new inmates. It stopped in front of Drax's cell, its gaze unreadable. Drax met its eyes with a defiance that was becoming a hallmark of his existence. "What? You here to offer us our one phone call?" The alien made a series of clicks and whirs that Drax interpreted as the alien equivalent of a condescending laugh. It gestured for him to step away from the door, and when Drax complied, it pressed a sequence on the control panel. The door slid open, and before Drax could react, he was yanked out into the corridor. "Hey!" Yara called out, the sound of her fists pounding against the cell bars echoing through the chamber. "Where are you taking him?" The guard ignored her, its grip on Drax's arm like iron. Drax didn't bother struggling. He had the distinct impression that any resistance would end with him being unceremoniously knocked out. Cade watched them go, a sour expression on his face. "Good luck, Drax. Don't do anything stupid." "Like getting caught," Drax shot back, earning a grim chuckle from Cade. The guard led Drax through a series of winding corridors, the route intentionally disorienting. They arrived at a room that could only be described as an alien interrogation chamber, complete with unpleasant-looking instruments, and a chair that screamed uncomfortable. Drax was unceremoniously shoved into the chair, restraints snapping into place with a finality that made his stomach clench. He watched as another alien entered the room, its presence commanding and unmistakably authoritative. The newcomer studied Drax with a curiosity that suggested he was little more than an interesting specimen. Human, it said, the word distorted by an accent that made it sound like a threat. You lead. Others. Drax leaned back as far as the restraints would allow, which wasn't much. You could say that. Or you could say I'm just the guy who got stuck with the responsibility. The alien tilted its head, considering. Why you? Here, Drax shrugged, or at least attempted to. Bad luck mostly and an overabundance of curiosity. The alien seemed to find this answer unsatisfactory, but it moved on. You're kind, dangerous. Only when provoked, Drax replied with a cocky grin. And before you ask, no, I'm not going to tell you anything useful. The alien's gaze turned icy, and it stepped forward, looming over him like a thundercloud. We'll see. Meanwhile, back in the cells, Yara was working through her own brand of frustration. She'd paced the length of her cell so many times she was starting to wear a groove into the floor. Got any ideas? Cade asked, his tone skeptical but tinged with hope. Yara paused, leaning against the bars that separated them. I'm thinking, but nothing that doesn't involve a miracle or a really clever escape artist. Cade snorted. I'm fresh out of miracles. They lapsed into silence again, each lost in their thoughts. Yara couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something, some vital piece of the puzzle that would allow them to turn the tables. Think Zilex is watching? Cade asked suddenly, his voice low. Yara considered the question. Probably. It's got a vested interest in us not getting vaporized. Funny way of showing it, Cade replied, his tone dark. Maybe it's got its own plan, she suggested. Or maybe we're just pawns in some bigger game. Comforting thought, Cade muttered, but there was a hint of grudging agreement in his voice. In the chamber, Drax was busy testing the limits of the restraints, which was proving to be an exercise in futility. The alien interrogator had left, leaving him with nothing but his thoughts and the unsettling hum of the machinery. Drax knew they were running out of time. If they didn't find a way to turn their situation around, they might never get off this ship. The thought was as unwelcome as it was persistent, gnawing at the edges of his resolve. The door opened again, and Drax's interrogator returned, flanked by the guard. The air between them was charged with unspoken tension, an understanding that this was the moment where things could either go very right or very wrong. You will tell us, the alien said, its voice a low rumble, or you suffer. Drax met its gaze with a steely determination. I've suffered enough to last a lifetime. Whatever you think you can do, it's not going to work. The alien leaned in, its eyes narrowing. We'll see. As the interrogation continued, Yara and Cade were busy attempting their own escape. Using a piece of metal they'd managed to pry loose from the bench, Yara was meticulously working on the lock to her cell. Remind me to never play poker with you, Cade called softly, watching her with a mix of admiration and disbelief. You've got the patience of a saint. Flattery will get you everywhere, Yara replied, her focus unwavering. Now keep an eye out for our jailers, would you? On it. Cade moved to the front of his cell, scanning the corridor for any signs of approaching guards. After what felt like an eternity, there was a soft click, and the cell door swung open. Yara allowed herself a brief moment of triumph before turning her attention to Cade's cell. Let's get you out of there, she said, moving with newfound urgency. Cade grinned, shaking his head in disbelief. You're a miracle worker. Hardly, Yara replied, focusing on the lock. Just persistent. With the cell door finally open, they slipped out into the corridor, moving with the cautious grace of people who knew they were one mistake away from disaster. Now what? Cade asked, his voice low. Yara glanced around, her mind racing. We find Drax and get the hell out of here. Simple enough, Cade replied, though they both knew it wouldn't be. Moving through the alien ship was like navigating a maze designed by a particularly sadistic architect. Every corridor looked the same, each turn a potential dead end. Any idea where they might be holding him? Cade asked, his voice a whisper. Your guess is as good as mine, Yara replied. We need to find a control room or something, see if we can figure out where they're keeping him. It was a plan born of desperation, but it was better than nothing. They continued their search, each step a gamble, each breath a prayer. Meanwhile, in the interrogation room, Drax was waging his own battle. His captors had grown frustrated, their patience wearing thinner with each non-answer. "You will talk," the alien insisted, its frustration evident. Drax grinned, a feral smile that spoke of defiance and the kind of madness that only comes from being pushed to the edge. "Maybe, but not today." The alien's response was a low growl, but before it could proceed, an alarm blared through the ship, its wail echoing off the walls like the world's worst wake-up call. "What's that?" Drax asked, feigning innocence. The alien didn't answer, its attention diverted by the sudden chaos. It barked orders at the guard, leaving Drax momentarily forgotten. "This could work," Drax muttered to himself, testing the restraints again. If he could just, the door burst open and Yara and Cade barreled in, weapons in hand and determination in their eyes. "Thought you could use a hand," Yara said, making quick work of the restraints. Drax sprang to his feet, adrenaline surging through him. "About time you two showed up." Cade handed him a weapon, a grin spreading across his face. "Couldn't let you have all the fun." The trio made their escape, moving with purpose through the ship. The corridors blurred by, each step a defiance of the odds, each breath a testament to their will to survive. They fought their way through, each alien engagement a reminder that they were fighting for more than just their lives. They were fighting for their freedom, for their right to exist in a universe that seemed determined to snuff them out. As they finally reached the escape pods, breaths ragged and bodies bruised, Yara couldn't help but laugh, a sound filled with relief and disbelief. "What's so funny?" Cade asked, though he was smiling too. "It's just, we actually did it," she replied, breathless and triumphant. Drax nodded, his gaze sweeping over his friends, his comrades. "We're not done yet, but we're not finished either." With a final burst of effort, they climbed into the escape pod, a small, cramped vessel that would take them away from the alien ship and back into the unknown. As they launched into the void, a new sense of purpose took hold. They were battered, they were tired, but they were alive. And as long as they were, there was hope. For Drax and his team, survival was just the beginning. Yara scowled at the comms panel like it had just insulted her mother, which, given its penchant for malfunctioning, was entirely plausible. She fiddled with the wiring, the kind of fiddling that was 20% engineering and 80% sheer bloody-mindedness. "Think you'll get that thing working?" Cade asked, leaning against the wall like he was merely contemplating life and not actively trying to stave off despair. "If I can't get it working, I'll make it explode in a spectacular fashion." "Either way, something's gonna happen," Yara retorted, giving the panel a hard thump for good measure. Cade chuckled, but the sound was more hollow than sincere. "Gotta love your optimism," Yara snorted. "Optimism? No, darling, that's just pure spite." She leaned back, hands on her hips, surveying her handiwork with a critical eye. The panel sparked ominously, which might have been a good sign or impending doom. Hard to tell on a ship that seemed hell-bent on falling apart around them. "Drax would know what to do," Cade mused, his tone carrying the weight of too many close calls and not enough victories. "Yeah, well, Drax has bigger fish to fry right now," Yara replied, but there was a hint of fondness in her voice. Like keeping his eyeballs inside his skull. They both lapsed into silence, the kind of silence that's less comforting and more a reminder of how deep in the shit they truly were. Somewhere in the back of Yara's mind, a thought started to form, the kind of thought that was half-baked and potentially explosive, but in a good way. "Maybe." "Cade," she said suddenly, "think Zilix is watching us." Cade blinked, caught off guard. "What? Like right now?" "Yeah. I mean, if that weasel's got any shred of decency left, it's probably got tabs on us, somewhere in this flying tin can of horrors." Cade thought about it for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, makes sense. Zilix always had this weird knack for self-preservation." Yara pointed a finger at him, eyes bright with something that might have been hope or madness. "Which means Zilix is probably waiting for us to do something stupidly brave so it can swoop in and play the hero." "Why do I get the feeling that stupidly brave is where you excel?" Cade asked, a smile twitching at his lips. "Because it is," Yara shot back, grinning like a cat who just found the cream. "And I think it's time we made use of that." With a newfound determination, Yara turned her attention back to the comms panel, her fingers dancing over the controls with a deftness that bordered on miraculous or suicidal. Again, hard to tell sometimes. "Come on, Zilex, you slippery bastard," she muttered, coaxing the machine with a mixture of threats and cajoling that usually worked on malfunctioning tech and reluctant allies alike. "Pick up the damn line." After what felt like an eternity, a flicker of static crackled through the speakers, followed by a voice that was as smug as it was grating. "Yara, is that you?" "Zilex," Yara said with all the warmth of a glacier. "Long time no backstab." "Ah, well, you know how it is. Business is business," Zilex replied as if that explained everything. "Cut the crap," Yara said, her patience thinner than a sheet of paper in a hurricane. "We need a way out, and you're going to help us." There was a pause on the other end, the kind of pause that suggests someone's weighing the pros and cons of being a decent person for once in their life. "What's in it for me?" "Your life," Yara answered, blunt and unyielding. Another pause followed by a sigh. "All right, you've got my attention." Yara didn't bother with gratitude. She wasn't feeling particularly charitable at the moment. "Good, here's the plan." As Yara and Cade worked on the details elsewhere on the ship, Drax was busy playing the part of the captive with an aptitude for causing migraines. The alien interrogator had returned, looking about as pleased as a cat in a bath. "You will talk," it repeated, as if repetition was the key to unlocking human secrets. Drax rolled his eyes. "Still on that old tune, huh? How about you try please for a change?" The alien didn't rise to the bait, but its frustration was as palpable as the stink of desperation hanging in the air. "You, stubborn, and you're observant." "Good for you," Drax replied, leaning back with the kind of casual defiance that only happens when you've got nothing to lose. Before the alien could muster a response, the ship shuddered violently, alarms blaring in a discordant symphony that screamed one thing: things were going to hell faster than an engine failure in 0G. "That you're doing?" the alien demanded, rounding on Drax with an accusatory glare. "Not directly, no. But I've got friends," Drax said, grinning like a man who's just found out his execution's been postponed indefinitely. The distraction was all he needed. With a swift motion, Drax managed to free himself from the restraints, a move that was equal parts desperation and sheer muscle memory from a lifetime of narrow escapes. He tackled the alien, the impact sending them both sprawling. Drax didn't waste time. He was up and running, heart pounding like war drums in his ears. He was a man on a mission, and his mission was simple: get the hell out before things got even worse. Which, considering the track record, was not a high bar. Elsewhere, Yara and Cade were making their move, slipping through the corridors with a blend of stealth and recklessness that would have made a ninja weep in admiration. The plan was simple: cause enough chaos to draw attention away from Drax, then rendezvous at the escape pods. Simple but potentially lethal. "Think Drax is doing okay?" Cade asked, keeping his voice low. "If he's not, we'll just have to save his ass again," Yara replied, her tone brisk and filled with the kind of confidence that comes from an utter lack of options. "He's like a cat with 9 lives, Cade mused. "Though I think he's on number 8 by now." "Well, let's hope he's not planning on using up the 9th today," Yara said, her eyes scanning the hallway for any signs of pursuit. As they rounded a corner, they spotted Drax sprinting towards them, his expression a mixture of relief and determination. "Took you long enough," he quipped, skidding to a halt beside them. "Hey, we were busy negotiating with traitors," Yara shot back, grinning despite herself. "Next time send a postcard," Drax replied, his grin infectious. The ship lurched again, a reminder that time was not on their side. They moved as one, a well-oiled machine of chaos and ingenuity. Each step brought them closer to the escape pods, closer to freedom. As they reached the pods, the ship's alarms blared louder, a cacophony of noise that spoke of imminent destruction and the kind of urgency that turns hesitation into a death sentence. Pick your favorite, Yara said, gesturing to the row of pods. Not much of a selection, Cade remarked, eyeing the battered vessels with a critical eye. Beggars, choosers, and all that, Drax said, climbing into one of the pods with the grace of a man who's done this far too many times. The trio squeezed into the cramped space, the door hissing shut with a finality that was both comforting and terrifying. Once inside, they took a moment to catch their breath, the realization of their escape washing over them like a tidal wave of relief. Drax punched the controls, the pod's engines roaring to life with a vigor that suggested it was just as eager to leave as they were. "Next stop, anywhere but here," he declared, his voice filled with the kind of hope that only survivors can truly understand. As the pod launched into the void, Yara leaned back, her heart still hammering in her chest. "Think Zilix will keep its word. Zilix would sell its own grandmother for a profit," Cade replied. "But for now, it's got a vested interest in us staying alive." "Funny how that works," Drax said, a wry smile playing on his lips. And as they drifted into the vastness of space, their breaths finally evening out, the trio knew that while their fight was far from over, they'd won this particular battle. For now, at least, they were out of the frying pan. The fire, however, was still very much on the horizon, and with it, the promise of more danger, more challenges, and, most importantly, more chances to prove that humans, despite all odds, were still the best at surviving the impossible. "Well," Yara said, breaking the silence, "that was fun. We really should stop meeting like this," Cade replied, the weight of their ordeal fading, if only for a moment. Drax chuckled, a sound filled with the kind of dry humor that comes from someone who's just laughed death in the face and lived to tell the tale. "Nah, where's the fun in that?" As the stars stretched out before them, a dazzling tapestry of light against the endless void, the trio settled in for the journey ahead, knowing that whatever awaited them, they'd face it together. That, after all, was the true strength of humanity, the ability to adapt, to endure, and to find humor even in the darkest of times. And somewhere out in the vastness of space, Zilix was watching, scheming, and perhaps regretting ever underestimating the resilience of its human allies. But that was a problem for another day. For now, there was only the quiet hum of the escape pod, the company of friends, and the knowledge that they'd live to fight another day. Until then, the universe would just have to wait. The escape pods weren't exactly first-class accommodations, more like the kind of ride you'd find in a carnival run by people who'd just failed a safety inspection. They rattled and groaned as they hurtled through the void, threatening to come apart at the seams with every passing second. "Think we're actually going to make it, or is this more of a die-in-style kind of situation?" Cade asked, his hands gripping the armrests as though sheer force of will could hold the thing together. "Optimism, Cade. It's what keeps us alive," Yara replied, though her grin was more of a grimace, or at least it gives us something to laugh about when it all goes to hell, laughing in the face of death. "My favorite hobby," Drax chimed in, eyes fixed on the flickering dashboard display as if daring it to give up on him now. The pods continued to shudder as they approached their destination, a rendezvous point where Zilix had promised to meet them, presumably not with open arms but maybe with a begrudging nod of acknowledgement, or, knowing Zilix, an invoice for services rendered. As they neared the drop zone, a dark shape loomed into view, a ship of sorts, though calling it that was generous. It looked like someone had taped together the remains of several wrecks and called it a day. "Ah, home, sweet home," Yara muttered, her voice laced with sarcasm. The pod thudded into the docking bay with all the grace of a drunken rhino, and the trio stumbled out, eager to get their feet on something that didn't feel like it was about to explode. "Welcome, esteemed guests." Zilix's voice crackled over the comms, dripping with its usual blend of insincerity and self-interest. "I trust your journey was enlightening, infuriating, starts with the same letter, so close enough," Drax replied, dusting himself off like a man who'd just emerged from a tumble dryer. They were greeted by a small contingent of Zilex's so-called associates, a ragtag bunch of aliens who looked as if they'd been cast off by interstellar society for being too eccentric even for space. Each one was more bizarre than the last, a menagerie of colors, shapes, and appendages that defied reason. "Friends of yours, Zilex?" Yara asked with a raised eyebrow. "Let's call them business partners," Zilex replied smoothly, its form materializing from the shadows with all the dramatic flair of a second-rate magician. "They have a vested interest in seeing this little conflict resolved." "Vested interest, huh? They buy shares in our misery," Cade quipped, eyeing the aliens with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "Something like that," Zilex said, flashing what might have been a smile if its face could manage such a thing. There was no time for pleasantries, or whatever passed for pleasantries among this crowd. The main conflict was still very much unresolved, and they had a date with destiny, or at least with the alien leaders calling the shots in this chaotic circus. The group made their way through the ship's corridors, the scent of burnt ozone and bad decisions thick in the air. Yara led the way with a determination that bordered on reckless, her mind set on one thing: ending this madness before it ended them. "Anyone else feel like we've done this before?" Drax remarked as they approached the command center, where their fate, and possibly the fate of more than a few worlds, would be decided. "Deja vu's just a fancy way of saying you've stepped in the same pile of crap twice," Yara replied, her voice tinged with the kind of steel that comes from a lifetime of stepping in metaphorical muck. As they entered the command center, they were met with a scene that was equal parts intimidating and absurd. The alien leaders, a collection of the most eclectic beings the galaxy had to offer, looked like a committee that had been assembled from a galactic version of Craigslist. "Ah, the humans," boomed one of the leaders, its voice reverberating through the chamber like a subwoofer on steroids. "We have been expecting you. Good to know our reputation precedes us," Cade said, crossing his arms with a nonchalance that was more bravado than anything else. "Though I'm guessing you're not here for our autograph." The leaders exchanged glances, communicating in a way only beings with too many eyes and not enough tact could manage. It wasn't exactly comforting. "We find ourselves at an impasse," another leader said, a creature that resembled a cross between a squid and a lava lamp. "Your actions have disrupted our operations. We demand restitution." "Restitution? Last time I checked, kidnapping wasn't a business transaction," Yara shot back, her tone sharpened to a knife's edge. The leaders clearly weren't used to being talked back to, certainly not by the very species they'd underestimated. Their discomfort was palpable, and not just because the chamber temperature seemed to fluctuate with their mood swings. "There is potential in cooperation," one of the aliens suggested, its voice less boisterous and more calculating. "Perhaps an agreement can be reached." "An agreement, huh?" Drax interjected, stepping up beside Yara with a confidence that bordered on foolhardy. "How about you stop trying to blow us up, and we'll stop making you look like fools?" The room fell silent, the kind of silence that usually precedes either an understanding or an all-out brawl. Neither option seemed particularly appealing, but given their track record, options were a luxury. "Peace," Yara said, her voice cutting through the tension like a lifeline. "That's what you want, isn't it? Otherwise, why bother talking?" The leaders shifted, their forms rippling in a way that suggested introspection or maybe just indecision. Yara's words were simple, but their weight was undeniable. "We are not opposed to peace," the squid lamp leader admitted grudgingly, its many appendages twitching with unspoken emotion. "Then let's talk terms," Yara said, her gaze steady and unyielding. "Because we're done playing by old rules. It's time for something new." The leaders conferred, their murmurs a strange symphony of clicks and growls. Finally, they turned back to the group, their expressions, if such a thing was possible, softened. "Very well," the lead alien conceded, its tone edged with reluctant respect. "We shall consider your proposal progress," Drax said with a grin, though his eyes were wary. "Hope it's not just the prelude to a firing squad." "Optimism, Drax," Yara reminded him, though even she seemed surprised by their apparent success. "We'll take what we can get." As the details were hammered out, the group could only hope that this fragile peace would hold, for it was built on nothing more than words, a flimsy foundation, yet one with the power to change everything. In the end, it wasn't weapons or technology that won the day, but the simple truth of shared existence. A truth that, for all its fragility, was stronger than fear. And if that wasn't the most ironic twist of fate, then nothing was. "Think Zilix is patting itself on the back right about now?" Cade asked as they were escorted from the chamber, the weight of potential peace hanging in the air. "Zilix probably already has the t-shirt printed," Yara replied, though her smile was genuine. "But for once I don't mind sharing the credit." Back on Zilix's patchwork ship, the trio finally allowed themselves a moment to breathe. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but for now, they'd managed to pull off the impossible. "Guess you're sticking around for the sequel?" Drax asked, a note of tease in his voice as he nudged Yara. "Someone's got to keep you two in line," she replied, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "Besides, I hear the next chapter's a real page-turner." As they settled in, the stars once more stretched out before them, a reminder of both the vastness of their universe and the smallness of their triumph. Yet within that smallness was a seed of something far greater: hope. And while hope wasn't exactly a frequent visitor in their line of work, it was a welcome one. Because in the end, hope, like laughter, was the one thing the universe couldn't take away. "Here's to not getting blown up tomorrow," Cade said, lifting an imaginary glass in a mock toast. "To not getting blown up," Yara and Drax echoed, clinking their own pretend glasses with a shared smile. And with that, they set course for the future, wherever it might lead. Because if there was one thing they'd learned, it was that even in the darkest of times, there was always something worth fighting for. Or at the very least, something worth laughing about. With peace negotiations barely started and already feeling like a punchline to a cosmic joke, Drax, Yara, and Cade found themselves with an unexpected task: rebuilding the Dyson sphere. You'd think intergalactic diplomacy would come with a maintenance team, but no, just 3 humans with a knack for trouble and a few too many close calls. "So, any bright ideas on how we're supposed to fix a marvel of engineering that's now more of a punchline?" Yara asked, staring at the colossal wreck the Dyson sphere had become. It loomed like a giant, cosmic oops hanging in the void. "Duct tape," Drax suggested, only half joking. "If it can fix everything from a leaky sink to a broken marriage, why not a decaying planetary megastructure? Maybe we'll get lucky and it'll fix itself," Cade added, though he knew as well as the others that luck hadn't exactly been their shadow on this misadventure. The reality was grim. The Dyson sphere, once a shining example of human ingenuity and ambition, now looked like a sepia-toned postcard from a future that never was. Its structure was a chaotic tapestry of debris, testament to humanity's reach exceeding its grasp. "Remember when they sold tickets to be part of history?" Drax asked, kicking a loose piece of metal. It clattered away into the ether, leaving a silence thicker than any atmosphere. "Yeah, they forgot to mention the history part involved more craters than the moon," Yara grunted, wrenching a panel that seemed glued by spite rather than bolts. "And no refunds." Zilix, ever the opportunist, had offered minimal assistance. Apparently, it was more interested in leveraging peace to sell bootleg human memorabilia. "I survived the Dyson disaster t-shirts included." At least it had a business plan. Humanity should take notes. "You guys ever think maybe we're the real aliens here?" Cade mused. "I mean, how often do we crash someone else's party and then stick around to clean up the mess?" "Frequently, if our history's anything to go by," Yara replied with a smirk. "We've got a reputation to uphold." They toiled on, manually resetting systems, rerouting power, and doing their best impression of engineers who knew what they were doing. The sphere groaned and clicked, a celestial old man grudgingly getting back on its feet. You know, for something that's supposed to harness the power of the sun, it's awfully cold in here, Drax muttered, rubbing his arms. Could have at least left the heating on. Maybe it's on vacation. Can't blame it, really, Yara said, gripping another console, its screen flickering reluctantly to life. Cade watched them, a contemplative look in his eyes. All this, he said, gesturing at the dying giant around them, makes you wonder why we even bother. Because we're stubborn and we hate losing, Drax shot back. And maybe because there's something worth saving, buried under all this scrap. That's a lot of rust to dig through to find salvation, Yara mused, though the corner of her mouth twitched in something almost like hope. Rebuilding the sphere was as much about proving to themselves they could as it was about the practicalities of survival. Humanity had a knack for rising from its own ashes, phoenixes with a penchant for self-destruction. What about Zilex? Cade asked, changing the topic faster than a politician dodging blame. Think it's actually on our side, Zilex? Drax snorted. It's on Zilex's side. Always has been. But if our goals line up occasionally, well, never look a gift alien in the mouth, Yara nodded. Zilex will do whatever benefits it most. Right now, that's working with us. Tomorrow, who knows? They shared a glance, a silent acknowledgement that alliances in space were about as stable as a politician's promises. Today's friend could be tomorrow's enemy, but for now, they had a common cause. The sphere systems began to hum with renewed life, a melody of machinery begrudgingly cooperating. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And in this unending void, progress was a luxury. Feels like we're making history. Again, Drax said, plugging away at another console. Or at least an extended footnote in someone's textbook, Yara replied, her fingers dancing over the keys with surprising grace. Fingers crossed it's not filed under disasters. As they worked, the vastness of space stretched out around them, a reminder of both their insignificance and their potential. It was as humbling as it was empowering. So, what happens if we actually pull this off? Cade asked, his tone half-joking as he adjusted a panel that seemed determined to escape its housing. Retire to a sandy beach somewhere, Drax offered. Assuming there's any beach left that isn't radioactive, or we get medals, promotions, and a nice shiny plaque to gather dust, Yara suggested, her voice dripping with mock enthusiasm. More likely, we get roped into another once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Cade said, shaking his head. Seems to be our lot in life. They all laughed, the sound echoing off the metallic walls, a small defiance against the universe's twisted sense of humor. In the end, it wasn't about medals or recognition. It was about survival and the stubborn belief that tomorrow could be better. The Dyson sphere, once a symbol of overreach, was becoming a testament to resilience. Piece by piece, it was coming together, not as a perfect whole but as a patchwork of scars and stories, much like the humans trying to save it. As the last connection sparked to life, the trio stepped back, admiring their work. It wasn't pretty, but it was theirs. A testament to human tenacity and the simple refusal to give up. Think they'll write songs about us? Cade asked, a grin tugging at his lips. If they do, I hope they skip the bit where I nearly blew us all up, Drax replied, scratching his head sheepishly. Or the part where I almost sold us to space pirates, Yara added, faux seriousness in her tone. Not exactly role model material. Hey, we're not heroes, Cade said, crossing his arms. Just idiots stubborn enough to keep trying. With the Dyson sphere stabilizing, they took a moment to reflect. Their journey had been more missteps than milestones, but somehow they'd managed to stumble their way to this precarious peace. What do you think happens next? Yara asked, breaking the comfortable silence. We live. We learn. We try not to screw up as badly next time, Drax answered, glancing up at the cosmos. And maybe, just maybe, we do some good along the way. A tall order, Cade said, but there was an edge of optimism in his voice. But I think we're up to it. They stood together, three humans against the universe, united by circumstance and choice. Their alliance with Zilex might be tentative and the road ahead uncertain, but for now, there was hope. The Dyson sphere, once a symbol of hubris, was now a canvas for a new story. One where humans and aliens could coexist, not as enemies but as partners. Maybe not friends, but definitely not foes. Guess we'll see what tomorrow brings, Yara said, her voice carrying a note of determination. Tomorrow can't be worse than today, Drax replied, though he knocked on the nearest metal surface for luck. They turned to leave, ready to face whatever the universe had in store. Together they were writing a new chapter, one where survival wasn't a question of if but how. Think we'll ever get a break? Cade asked as they walked away from the repaired sphere. Breaks are for quitters, Yara replied, her stride confident. We've got a universe to save, and with that they faced the stars, ready to embrace whatever came next. Because if there was one thing they'd learned, it was that in the vast darkness of space, even the smallest flame could light the way. In the end, it wasn't just about rebuilding the Dyson sphere, but about rebuilding bridges, between species, between worlds, and between each other. Because survival, like hope, was a team effort. And so they ventured forth, three humans with a knack for trouble and a universe of possibilities before them. For in the end, it wasn't the technology or the weapons that made them strong, but the simple act of believing in tomorrow. Here's to hope, Cade said, lifting an imaginary glass once more. To hope, Drax and Yara echoed, their voices united. And with that, they set their course for the future, knowing that whatever came next, they'd face it together. Because in a universe teeming with uncertainty, the only sure thing was each other. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.